love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, 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 I will never be the same. Never be the same ever again. Well, here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, whoa, I will never be the same. Will never be the same ever again. Given my all to you. Be still and know the Lord. Be still.
And God's will is simple. The most wretched man in hell will not be Adolf Hitler. The most wretched man in hell, or woman, will not be one like Joe Stalin or some of these more modern devils. The most wretched person in hell will be a former Seventh-day Adventist.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I am your host for today, Peter Dixon, and it's great to be with you all again. I really enjoyed my conversation yesterday with Reinda Bruinsma, and he coped so well with my quite, what's the word for it? Robust questioning, and so much so that he's coming back June 10, which I think will be June 9 USA time, and we're going to continue the conversation. In fact, it seemed to have really hit a nerve with audiences, and within 10 hours there had been over 6,000 views, engagement, etc., with that particular program. So, yeah, it might have felt a little uncomfortable for some. It didn't feel that way for Reinda and myself. In fact, I think it's one of the best interviews I've done, even though I went hard. I don't think I interrupted too much, but I did kind of continue on with certain points. And as always, Reinda Bruinsma was very gracious and of his time, and also his informative abilities. He has so much knowledge, and I think he really does have a love of Adventism and a certain kind of Adventism that he hopes to see flourish. And as I mentioned in the program, sometimes I sound frustrated or passionate, or that I'm drilling down on certain points. I think in many ways I am cajoling the Progressive Adventist, not because I dislike them, but because I do see a relevance in their kind of Adventism that needs to gain a foothold and progress and influence within the Adventist Church. I will never, ever become an Adventist again, even if the Progressive Adventists took control and changed it into a more Bible-based movement. But I do believe that the traditional Adventism, if left unchecked and without some kind of safe place to find harbour away from within the movement itself, it's harmful for people who join the church and for people who are born into the church, for young people. And there's many who would disagree with me. That's just my opinion, that these guys helped me so much with their incredible gospel-focused kind of Adventism. It made my life growing up much more meaningful and more rewarding in a sense of a connection to the gospel. People like Des Ford and many of the Progressive Adventists that I have interviewed and mentioned in the past, those who have written books, etc., they offered me a different kind of Adventism. Now, it turns out the traditional Adventists and those who run the Adventist church, they don't really like the new theology that the Gospel Adventists present. And I've spoken on that topic many times, so I won't talk about it again now. However, I just want to encourage people that are Progressive Adventists to get moving, get networked. And Reinda Bruinsma wasn't triggered or upset by my pushing him on certain things. As I said, so much so that he's agreed to join us again in 2 or 3 weeks' time. He saw value in that conversation and that dialogue where I think it's serious that these guys that have a progressive gospel-focused Adventism get off their backsides and coordinate, network, and create an independent ministry within the Adventist Church that provides a safe space. And look, there are movements there. I'm not saying that they're not. I'm just pointing out that they're largely ineffective because on a global scale, they're not trying to network enough, in my humble opinion. And we go back today, 46 years, in a discussion of what I believe is a kangaroo court, the Kangaroo Court of Des Ford. This is a replay of a fantastic interview I had, and in my desire to upload season 2 onto YouTube and other platforms that are now public. So this was season 2, episode 41 with Pastor Alec Gazsik. Sadly, Pastor Alec has passed away since recording this interview 6 years ago. He passed away, I think, reasonably recently, in the last year or two. And that's a sad thing because, as you'll find in this replay, in this interview where we discuss Des Ford and Glacier View, you'll find him to be a very wonderful individual, someone who truly cared about people, and like Des Ford himself, was someone very much involved with bringing the assurance of salvation into people's lives, the good news of the gospel, and pastoral care. So I want you to sit back and relax and enjoy this presentation as we jump back in time 6 years to season 2, episode 41, 2020. Here we are in 2026, and enjoy my interview with Alec Gazsik as we discuss all things Adventist, but particularly focus on Des Ford, Glacier View, what went down 46 years ago, that essentially was a week, a court, and a designed process that would see Des Ford dismissed. And as I mentioned in the chat, please go on YouTube and find season 2, Des Ford. I think, what's it called? It's just called SDA. If you go to @SDA season 2, the number 2, that's where I'm hosting all the 86 interviews from season 2. So we're nearly halfway to completing that job of making this particular resource available for the whole world to see. These videos are no longer available anywhere else, and only now here on SDAQ&A and over at SDA Season 2. And I think you'll really enjoy getting insights into those interviews where I chat with many people who were actually there. And I think you'll really enjoy it. Anyway, let's get on with the program. And as I said, today we are looking at an interview I did with Pastor Alec Gazsik. Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A podcast. I'm your host for today, Peter Dixon, and my very special guest is Pastor Alec Gazsik. How are you, Alec?
I'm feeling fine, thanks, Peter.
That's good. And as you were saying up there, it's quite a beautiful day, is it?
It is. It's very sunny outside.
Can you tilt your camera down a tiny bit just so we see less of the roof and more of your head? There we go. That's great. And
the roof is better.
What part of Queensland are you living in?
Well, at the moment, we're living in Ipswich.
Nice.
I retired into Ipswich. It's a nice place to retire. It's central to everything. So we thought we'd stay here rather than go somewhere exotic.
It's a bit inland, isn't it, Ipswich?
It's about 38 kilometres west of Brisbane.
Yeah, yeah,
Very cold in the morning, but the beautiful, beautiful days.
yeah. And summer gets very hot there too, doesn't it?
It does. It's very humid.
Yeah. Now we've crossed paths over the years, living in Kurrambong around the same time. Your eldest son is Nathan, that's right, isn't it?
Nathan, that's correct, yes.
And Trafford.
Trafford, yes. My
Is-
second son.
It's just the two boys?
Now I have a daughter called Melissa.
Of course, Melissa. Sorry, Melissa. Momentarily lapse of memory there. And I remember, I think it was my first year out teaching, and your kids were at Avondale there, and I actually it wasn't my first year out teaching, but it was my first year that I actually taught. I'd been out doing other stuff for a couple of years, and I remember they were great kids, and you know your family was just a much loved local Kurrambong family. Were you working at college during that time, or were you a pastor at a local church?
No, I was actually working with your father for most of that time, Peter. I was the Dean of Men, and your father was Dean of Students. So he was virtually my boss.
Yeah, that's what I thought, and I was away in New Zealand most of that time, living in Auckland, and then of course. So what years it would have been? 86
Oh,
to 90 something.
yeah, would have been late 80s to about 92, I think we left. Yeah.
Yeah, I came back late 89, and very much remember catching up with you and whatnot around town.
Well, I remember you as well as being the fellow with the guitar and used to play songs.
That's
And
right.
I reflect and think back, in those days I used to think of you as a rebel without a cause, but now you're a rebel with a cause.
It took a long time. I remember feeling a bit like that actually, that I felt like I had something to say, but no one was listening.
Yes.
And the irony is I still don't have anything to say, but people are listening to the people I'm interviewing that do have something to say.
Yes.
So nothing much has changed for me, except instead of singing, I'm kind of interviewing, and I'm really enjoying it actually.
Right.
I do about 15 to 17 interviews a week, and probably 4 to 6 are SDAQ&A, about 25 hours a week on SDAQ&A, and I'm really loving it. And this particular series, we're calling it Season 2 of the podcast, has certainly been one of the most fascinating projects I've ever been involved with in my life. So it's
You're doing a
great.
great job. It'll go down in history and in posterity, I think.
I hope
It's a
so.
valuable resource. Yeah.
I hope so, as you say, as a valuable resource, because I think we've uncovered lots of information, and with social media, you can kind of leave it out there, and people can come and interact with it and engage, and even comment and keep it updated as people stumble across it, I guess. But so thank you very much for being willing to be a part of it. And I thought before we kind of kicked into a little bit of your thoughts on Des Ford and Glacier View and the theme of our series, I wanted you to just tell us a little bit about your family, your connection to the SDA Church, the different places you've lived, some career highlights, that kind of thing.
Well, I'm a member of a refugee family after the Second World War, and we eventually settled in a place called Benalla in Victoria, which had a migrant camp there. And I grew up in Benalla, did my schooling there, and in my, I guess, year 11 and 12, matriculation in those days, I came across Adventists. And one of the boys that came to school was John Sedgman, and Pastor Sedgman So I heard, that was the first time I heard about Seventh-day Adventists, but eventually I actually did Bible studies and became a Seventh-day Adventist myself, and from with Pastor Cliff Murchison in those days.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he baptised me, and I was baptised on January 1, 1966, and ended up at Avondale College on February 13, same year. So I really didn't have much of an Adventist background at all.
Wow.
I couldn't speak the Adventist language. I didn't dress like an Adventist. And I recall when I arrived at Avondale, I spent 3 days standing in front of Watson Hall watching people come in and out before somebody spoke to me, because I just had no Adventist connections or background, whatever.
Wow. And yet you landed right smack bang in the middle of the birthing of a whole kind of new kind of Adventism that was emerging.
Oh, absolutely. But there was still the old traditional Adventist background that was holding sway at the time.
Yeah.
And I recall that it was very much oriented towards Ellen White's authority, doctrinal truth rather than spiritual experience. But looking back on it, I think it was probably the golden age of Avondale. I know I'm biased, but we had some tremendous lecturers.
Yeah.
Like Des Ford, for instance, and Russell Crans, and a few of those sorts of people. Even old Alf Jorgensen. He was a really lovely fellow. And so I think it was, to my way, I think it was the golden age of Avondale. But I do recall that my very first lecture was Daniel and Revelation with Des Ford. And I went into the class in those days thinking that the story of Jonah was in the New Testament. That's how much I knew about the Bible. And then to be confronted by Des Ford and then Revelation was pretty heavy.
Did you say that was your first lecture?
My very first lecture at Avondale College was Daniel and Revelation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but look, if it hadn't have been for people like Des Ford and Russell Crans, and in those days they had a running debate going, will the heathen be saved? All the theology boys got caught up in it, and, we'd egg them on and so forth. I think it was done in fun, but, those two fellows, if it hadn't have been for them, I probably would have left Avondale as quick as I got there. But those two men really challenged my mind. And so I decided to stay for a year, but then I ended up staying for 3 more years and got my theology degree and so forth, and went into ministry. But,
what made you decide to go into ministry?
Well,
not just have the Avondale experience,
I never knew about the Avondale experience, so it wasn't something I was there for. But I had, well, it was a funny thing because I had done some career planning. There was just a new thing that people were coming to your high school in year 12 and go through, your possible future careers. And the career planner that talked to me said, well, what do you want to be? And just out of the blue, I said, I want to be a clergyman. He said, do you go to church? I said, no. And he laughed. And anyway, in my year 11, I was doing all sciences. And when I got to year 12, I thought, yeah, science is good, but it tells you how, but it doesn't tell you why. And I started reading existentialist novelists like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre and these fellows. And I was really, I was having an existential sort of a crisis, I guess, not a real crisis, but that's where my mind was going. And I'd applied to the Melbourne Age for a journalist cadetship. And I was waiting for some results of that. But in the meantime, Pastor Murchison and his family came along. And Mrs. Murchison said to me before I was baptised, she said, would you consider going to Avondale? Wow. I said, to do what? And she said, to do ministry. And I said, well, yeah, I suppose. And I really just wanted to go and get a few existential answers. I wasn't serious about ministry at that stage. And so the Benalla Church, kind as they are, they gathered together my first year college, or half a year's college fees, my clothes and bedding and everything and packed me off to Avondale.
Wow.
And so there, probably after my first year, I really felt a calling to the ministry then. And so I completed the course and got picked up in ministry.
What other classes did Des teach you in, or was that the only one?
Well, no, the memorable ones were, that of course was very memorable. And the other one was the life and teachings of Christ. We did a whole year on the life and teachings of Christ, and that was just fantastic. You virtually went through the Gospels, and I can't remember the actual name of the class, but he and Russell Crans took us through an introduction to philosophy, and that was another brilliant class. I just couldn't believe, I thought, well, Des was a theologian, but he was well read in Greek philosophers and philosophy and all that sort of thing. So
yeah,
I was that really impressed me and really gave me a direction in life, I guess.
As I've interviewed different people, your name has come up. They'll talk about other classmates and things as they, remember who was in their class and whatnot in that time period. Do you remember some of your other classmates? Was it 66, did you say? It was your...
66, I went to Avondale, graduated in 69.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, there were some good fellows at that time. I mean, one I thought was the smartest of a lot of us was Lyle Ice, of course.
Yes.
Because he could memorise 200 poems, which we did for English in those days. And we had a test for the first line of the poem and the last line of the poem. We had to name the writer, who the poet was. And he got 100% for it.
Yeah.
Very bright. But no, there was Chester Stanley and Russell Stanley and the Kingdom Boys. And,
yeah.
I guess the most famous would have been Michael Chamberlain. He was in that class.
We moved there 68, 69. I was just in primary school, just started primary school, but Dad, I think, was lecturing there 68, 69, 70 or 69, 70. So I have distant memories of those times, and just there seemed to be just a nice vibe going on around college in the late 60s.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was a great time. But it took me a while to fit in. I remember our first college beach picnic, and as I said, I had no Adventist background, so we had to meet the buses down in front of the education building, and I went charging down there in my cut-down jeans and t-shirt, and guitar slung over my shoulder, going to the beach. And I was a bit mortified when all the other fellows came out with dress slacks and short sleeve shirts. I thought we're going to the beach, but so that was an education.
It sounds like you were on the outside culturally, as well as the subculture of Adventism as well.
Oh, that's true.
It wasn't just the difference in of the culture. There was the Adventist coupled together. You would have felt very outsiderish. Did you find that you soon made, firm, lifelong friends, or did you feel a little bit on the outer the whole time?
No, well, there was an element of being on the outer the whole time because, there is a bit of dynastic kind of bent in Adventism. If you have the right family name, you're an Adventist. If you don't have the right family name, you're sort of a bit on the outer. And I did sense that, but certainly it wasn't a hardship. All the fellas, we were friends. We had a good time together.
Yeah.
But I just, there was that element of never just quite fitting in.
Yeah. It's funny. I've felt that too, but I think I'm fourth or fifth generation Adventist. But
Right.
but we weren't part of of some of the dynasties. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I've got my neighbour. Darren is definitely part of lots of family within Adventism, and he's a great guy. And there's never any sign of anything nepotistic. But there are some key families that even subconsciously, I'm sure that some people feel a little bit more at home within Adventism because they're just part of that
Yes.
that connection, I guess.
Yes, well, Darren, I know Darren. He was one of the boys in the dormitory at the time when I was dean of men there, and I smile now because he's okay because he's got a hold of Ellen White's writing desk.
That's right. I could literally open a window and throw a stone and probably hit it.
Yes.
A great guy, great family, great kids.
Yes.
And yeah,
Well, Darren comes from a very faithful, staunch Adventist family from Mildura.
yeah.
Yeah, a lovely family.
Did you find later in life as you went for jobs and things that it was a little bit harder because you didn't have the entrenched Adventist kind of connection?
Yes, I did. I was always last on the list for that reason, so to speak. But the interesting one, Peter, was that if ever there was a job in the offing, I was never considered for it because later on, this is after '79, they considered me to be a friend of Des Ford, so therefore,
Oh my goodness!
I was always put down at the bottom of the list.
So you were first generation Adventist.
Yes.
You were from a kind of country town.
Yes.
You weren't part of the dynastic families,
Yes.
and you were a friend of Des. You had it all going for you, didn't you?
I did. Yes.
I remember when I came back in '89. Those years I was talking about where your kids were at school, and I'd started doing some teaching there. I was special ed teacher, so they weren't in my class. I just hasten to add there at the high school. But I always found you to be a really friendly, interesting, nice guy. Like, and I don't mean nice in a
Yes.
sense of an ineffectual person. You were very warm. You showed a lot of the key things that are important, I think, in showing pastoral care to your to your students, to the community. Did you have aspirations to kind of, get a PhD and become an administrator yourself?
No, look, I've always considered, and I'm not deprecating myself or anything, but I've always considered myself to be a bear with a very small brain, a bit like Winnie the Pooh, and while I have an interest in many things and theology and so forth, I just didn't think I had the intellectual capacity to go on and get a PhD. And besides that, as you're saying, I saw ministry in terms of being a people helper.
Yeah.
And people would say to me, how do what do you think you're doing in ministry? And I said, well, there's two things I'm doing. One, I believe that I'm doing is that I'm teaching people to become fully human and fully alive. And I do consider that Jesus was called the Son of Man because he was the after sin entered, he was the only really true human. And we have the opportunity to live this life to the full, to reach out and take a hold of life and live it to the full, but always being aware that death stalks the periphery of our vision. And so my job was to teach people to live fully human lives and to prepare people for death. And of course that takes in the gospel, it takes in leading people to salvation and all of that. But that's how I saw my task as a minister, was to be a people helper.
Yeah, that's great. And I think so many of the pastors I've interviewed really are drawn to that pastoral care side of things.
Yes.
And some of them have left Adventism but found a niche, or as our American friends say, the niche within
Yes.
environments that they can be able to still use the skills they learned as Adventist pastors. Did you?
Well, it's interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the temptation has been there at times to leave Adventism, but there are two things that have prevented me from doing it. One was Des Ford, because I remember we both shared accommodation in Bendigo, and just after, well, yeah, I'm not sure exactly when it was in the sequence of things, but he was there to take some meetings for Good News Unlimited in Bendigo, and I was there to take some youth meetings. I was in youth ministry at the time, and after we'd both finished and come back, we were staying at the Cooper's place, Barry Cooper and Robert Cooper, and after we'd finished and came back, we were just chatting together, and he did say to me, he said, look, he said, people need to stay in the church and help to move the church on from the inside. And he was very, very sincere in trying to save the young fellows to keep in the church and to, function in their ministry within the church system. Yeah. And the other one, of course, was that I was lucky that too at the time. Well, in 1979, I started youth ministry in Victoria, and Brian, I was working with Brian in youth ministry, and he'd gone over to America to do family life, a PhD in family life. And when he came back, he introduced me to John Powell, the Jesuit priest.
Wow.
And for a Jesuit priest, John Powell understood the gospel. And I think reading John Powell's books really kind of gave me a new enthusiasm for ministry within the Adventist Church.
Did people ever accuse you of playing with fire by reading his books?
Yes. Well, the interesting thing was that when I was at Dean of Men at Adventists after your father left, we were planning for a week of prayer, and I put the proposal forward that we get John Powell to come and speak to us. And the little committee we had at the time said, well, go ahead and contact him and see if he'll come. So being naive, I did contact him, and he said he would come, but then the college pulled the rug out from under it because he was a Jesuit priest. But, in some of our universities in America, and I think it may have been Andrews, he'd already spoken at those places, but Australia being so conservative, they just wouldn't take the risk.
Yeah.
So I had to write and apologise to him and say, I'm sorry, we didn't have any emails in those days. I had to write and apologise and say, I'm sorry, but, this side of the kingdom, we're going to be apart.
Not on Adventist soil.
No, that's right.
What were your thoughts when, the college had said they would take on the memorial service of Des Ford, and then due to pressure they moved it off campus?
Wasn't surprised, Peter. I thought it was going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was the same. Sad, but not surprising.
No.
A bit like the women's ordination no vote. It was sad, but not surprising in many ways.
Yes.
I
I would have hoped that they would have gone and allowed them to go division by division on that one.
Yeah.
But sadly, it didn't happen.
Well, my understanding is that Ellen White in Australia set up or helped set up the concept of the unions so that individual countries could kind of represent their people and subculture, the quirks of the subcultures, and make decisions based more accurately in for their local people. And she set that up, and it seemed to purposely to oppose the kind of, is it kingly, that kind of global leadership domination. And so I would have thought having people choose for themselves in the different unions would have been a great way to go, and one that was kind of advised by Ellen herself.
Yes. Well, I smile about it. It's not funny, but I always smile about it because I got into trouble when I was pastor of East Paran Church. I got into trouble for ordaining women elders before it was officially sanctioned.
Oh, really?
Yes. I'd taken over, well, I was in youth ministry, but I had looked after East Paran Church in Melbourne, and previous to me, or sometime before me, a minister, youth minister, Jim Johansson. I don't know whether you've ever heard of him.
Heard of him, yes.
But he was an excellent youth minister, really great fellow. And he'd been pastor of East Brand Church, and at his time, none of the men would take on eldership. And so he ordained women elders.
Mm.
And when I came along the scene, virtually the same thing happened. The men wouldn't be elders. And so I had to ordain women elders. And Pastor Ken Lowe, who was the president of the conference, heard about it. And that was a time when, the division was contacting the general conference about permission or not have permission and so forth. Anyway, Pastor Ken Lowe heard that I'd ordained these women elders, and I went into his office on the mat in front of his desk, and he questioned me. He said, "What's going on here? Is there some conspiracy?" I said, "No, Pastor Lowe, it's just that this is a situation. There were women elders there, and they'd already been ordained, so I ordained women elders." And anyway, he looked at me and sort of smiled and said, he said, "You're an idiot. Get out of here." He said, "At least you had the good sense not to ask for permission." So that was my history of my ordination of women elders.
Act first, seek permission
Yes.
later.
Yes.
I remember someone writing to me not that long ago that has quite high contacts in the GC level, and they were saying that, because I was chatting with them, when do you think they'll eventually ordain women? And he wrote and said, "Oh, look, it's not even going to come onto the table again for 10 years. And and in the meantime, there'll be political moves to ensure it may never come onto the table again. If certain compliance document edicts have gained even more power." And then they said, and not only that, the plan is to wind back women elder ordination as well. So that was from someone that had a contact really up high in what they've been discussing on the side of the more conservative leadership. That's a bit worrying, isn't it?
Well, yes and no. I've sensed that for quite some time now, just having been retired and just being in the local church and moving about. The conservative elements of our church are really still much against women being ordained as elders. Mm. And I've always suspected or felt that they've been trying to move towards even rescinding women elders. So I'm not surprised at all. In fact, my daughter, Melissa, so having been at Avondale and so forth, she grew up at Avondale. And when she finished at year 12, she said, "I think I'll go to Avondale and do ministry, Dad, do theology." I said, "Well, no, Melissa, go off and get another degree first. Then if you want to go to Avondale and do theology, do it." Because she's the type who would not be satisfied unless she was ordained as a minister.
I know.
Fight. And I
love it.
No, I said, it'll never happen in my lifetime, and it may not happen in yours.
Yeah.
So she went off to uni and got a degree in law and is now a lawyer. So
that's great. Oh, I love your kids. Like they stand out in my memory because of that kind of wonderful independence of spirit, and you've done really well in creating three great kids that really think for themselves. And
well, thank you, Peter.
Yeah, it's great. I've had some great chats with Nathan, and always thought, I'd love to, try and chat with him more, but we just kind of live literally in different places, parts of the world, and
that's right. He's in Thailand at the moment.
That's right.
Yeah.
I was flying through once and landing in Bangkok for a connecting flight, and tried very hard to catch up with him because I had about 4 hours between flights or something, but it didn't happen. So you've done really well there, and isn't it sad to think that you'd have to say to your daughter that not only in your lifetime, but you doubt in her lifetime that it will happen? And I think of a lot of the women that are now approaching their 70s or in their 70s that have worked so hard to bring about that kind of equality. They must have just been devastated and heartbroken at the no vote. It must have just really hurt.
Well, I'm sure it did. And the thing is, though, that we really do need to recognise the value of those women in ministry. I mean, having spent 40 something years in ministry, there are times when I've definitely felt that a woman's understanding in this situation would have been so much superior to what I could offer at that time. And the women, and look, my best senior elder of any church I've pastored in was a woman senior elder in Darwin. She stands out in my mind as being the top elder that I've worked with in all the churches I've been in. Yeah.
Well, I love what, is it Paul that was talking about the equality and slave and the master, that we're all equal, men, women, Gentile, Jew, slave, and master. And it seems to be a fairly core, like a principle amongst even Christ's teachings. Not that he said those things, those exact words, but the implication is very much about equality and justice and fair play and empowering people and having life more abundant. And I think the power of being able to, for men and women to work together as equals to move something positive forward, it's what a loss that the church can't realise that. I was talking to a conservative friend of mine the other day, and he said that when he looks at the data, churches that have allowed women's ordination and that kind of equality to emerge have begun to fail. I don't know if that's true, is it?
Oh, no, I don't think so. Not in my experience.
Yeah. Like, he was kind of implying that there's a bit of a backlash of people wanting a more conservative kind of man is the head of the home. But it'd be interesting to see what the stats are on that. I can't imagine at all that if men and women act as equals and work together to a cause, that it could only bring powerful results, really good results.
Well, I think in my experience, Peter, and even now, most people in our church are very sincere and very faithful. But as Des used to say, they're lovely people but don't read very much.
Right.
And that's the truth of it. They are lovely, sincere, faithful people, but they don't really think deeply. There is a minority element who think deeply and who are interested in these sorts of things. But the majority of people are happy to go along to church on Sabbath, to fellowship with people, to be kind of encouraged in their life's journey. But I've been in places where I've preached a gospel sermon, a straight gospel sermon, and implied, of course, that God does not keep a record of our sins. We are forgiven. And I can't understand why people don't quote Psalm 130 a little bit more, because there, the psalmist says, "O Lord, if you kept a record of sins, who would be able to stand?" And you preach a gospel sermon, and the next week, when I've invited a preacher in, and they're absolutely conservative, and they will preach directly opposite what I preached the week before. When people came out after I preached, "Oh, thank you, Pastor, lovely sermon, Pastor." The next week, when you get something totally opposite, "Oh, thank you, Pastor, lovely sermon, Pastor." It doesn't go really. I mean, generalising, that's about the level of where a majority of our people are involved.
And I've noticed even with, you look right back to the Concerned Brethren with the Standish brothers, for example, there's always been a high representation of very intelligent academic people within the conservative movements. I was just going to mention some names of current people, but like someone like Doug Batchelor, very, very capable individual. So there's always a history of capable, intelligent, scholarly, academic work going on the scenes. But I think at a grassroots level, all people seem to just want to just get on with it and turn up and enjoy nice lunch and the camaraderie of hanging out together and being able to say happy Sabbath to each other and
yes, that's right,
and feel sheltered in the storm of life, sheltered from the storm.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. One of the churches I was at, I was just new in the church, and some very conservative people came along. They apparently had been running some ultra-conservative videos in the afternoon, and the church board had banned them from doing that.
Oh.
Yes. So anyway, and these were ultra-conservative, so as soon as I got there, they came rushing up to me and saying, "Pastor, can we show these videos in the church this afternoon?" And I said, "Well, look, let me ask you a couple of questions." I said, "Are you a member of this church? Baptized?" "Yes." "Do you pay your faithful tithe?" "Yes." I said, "Okay, the church is yours and you can show those videos." "Oh, can we really?" "Yes, yes." I said, "You can. But remember this, that if somebody comes up to me and says, 'Pastor, can we show these Des Ford videos this afternoon?' I'll ask them the same question. Are you a member of the church? Do you pay your tithe? Then yes, you can show this video." "Oh, would you do that?" I said, "Yes, I certainly would." And even the conference president was concerned that I allowed them to show these videos, and he rang me up and I said, "Look," I said, "there's no need to worry about it, because they'll only run for 2 or 3 weeks,
Yeah.
and then they'll close down." And
Yeah.
sure enough, they ran for 2 or 3 weeks. Nobody came back in the afternoon, and so they didn't show the videos anymore.
Yeah.
And I think we get all worked up about too much.
Yeah.
And, things will naturally sort themselves out.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if leadership had a bit more courage, they would just say, "Yeah, sure. Are you a church member? Are you paying your tithe and offerings? Yeah, go ahead, explore Des Ford if you want to, or go ahead and explore George Burnside."
Yes.
I remember in the early 80s, and maybe you can confirm this because it was sent out to pastors, and a pastor friend of mine showed me. It was back in the heyday of faxing. And I'm not sure if it was Australia-wide or just the Sydney conference, but the facts said that the churches weren't to invite George Burnside or Des Ford. I can't remember if it was the early 90s or the early 80s. But I remember thinking, wow, they're just cutting off both ends of the spectrum, and that just stops dialogue and debate and discussion.
Yes. I've been very fortunate, I think, in many ways. I think of that. I think it's Albert Facey's, book, like A Fortunate Life. When I went to Avondale as a theology student, my name came up, or my number came up in the conscription ballot to go to Vietnam.
Oh, right.
And so I just wrote back and said, "Look, I've started theological college." And they said, "Okay, we'll give you an indefinite deferment." My parents appreciated that. And then, when all this, the 1979 and so forth, and Glacier View came about, began in Western Australia, which was a very difficult conference to remain in those days. And I got a call to Victoria into youth ministry in Victoria. And we had the best of conference presidents there, Pastor Ken Lowe. I don't think he didn't deliberately sack anybody over their views. A couple of fellows pulled out voluntarily, but it was a very safe conference to be in.
I've had a few people say that. Yeah,
under his presidency, it was a very, very safe conference to be in.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, I think I've been very, very fortunate.
Yeah.
And I've always preached what Des taught us at Avondale, the gospel. That's how I understood it. That's what I knew. That's what I preached. And for some reason, I never got into trouble over it. Over those sorts of sermons. And in fact, as I got older and a bit more senior, I was able to, a couple of conference presidents, I confronted with them. I was sitting on an executive committee, and I'd say to them, you really cannot reconcile the Reformation gospel and the investigative judgment. You do need to give one or the other up.
You said this to the conference president?
Yes.
Who was the president?
Oh, no, better not say. but I said it to a couple of them. Well, we'd been to Avondale together, so I felt as I could say it to them.
And what was the answer?
Oh, no, you can. This is what still gets me to this day. Right. That there are people out there who feel as though they can reconcile the Reformation gospel and the investigative judgment. And having read Leroy Froome's book, The Movement of Destiny, where he outlines very specifically Ellen White's own movement towards, the Reformation gospel. And I really can't understand how people can't see the two are not compatible. I know my good friend Lloyd Rollerman,
yes,
great fellow, but he's adamant that you can reconcile the two. I just wish you could show me how you can.
We had a good interview together here, and after this series is finished, I'm going to do a not straight away, but a series on the investigative judgment and the sanctuary. What was it then? How has it changed? What's the current view? Yes. And I'm going to invite him back because I want him to really unpack how he can get from the Bible that sanctuary, Adventist sanctuary view. And I'm not talking about going from one to the holy to the most holy. I'm talking about entering a new phase of ministry. I don't know how you can get that and tie it in with 1844.
Well, it's interesting. When I was studying with Pastor Murchison, one of the studies I remember most was a study on Daniel 8:9 and the sanctuary. And he was very good. He drew diagrams and so forth for me, and I think I've still got them in my files. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. Never heard this sort of thing, So, and I grew up in the Methodist church. I mean, most of my friends were Methodists, but it was just a token thing. We used to go to youth group and have a good time. But I grabbed this piece of paper and rushing off to see my Methodist friends because they knew I was starting to be an Adventist. They thought I was a bit silly, but they knew. And anyway, I thought, listen to this. And I started taking them through a study on Hebrews 8 and 9. And then all of a sudden I said, that's not what the pastor, that doesn't measure up with what the pastor told me.
Right.
Right? And I had to apologise to my friends and back out of the study, because,
So when was this, when you'd finished college or?
No, this was even before I went to college.
Oh, before you went to college?
Yeah, this is while I was studying with Pastor Murchison.
So was part of the desire to go to college to help nut that out and make the pieces fit?
No, the desire to go to college was purely existential.
So it sounds like early on you were kind of at least dabbling in the notion of the sanctuary and the investigative judgment and trying to make it fit with the Bible.
Oh, yes.
Can I look at a 10-year period? When did you graduate from Avondale?
69.
Oh, yeah, you said that, sorry. Can you take me from, let's say, 74 to 84, where you were working, when you became aware of Glacier View? Did you listen to the tape of 1979, October 27 forum? Just take me through those 10 years, and I'll kind of stop you every now and again just to dig a bit deeper in some of the areas. But where did you go immediately after college? And then I'm interested in that, particularly that 10-year period, because that's kind of where all the bombs seem to go off.
Yes. Well, I graduated in 69, and in 1970 I ended up in Western Australia as an intern. My first church was Cottesloe Church, who was handed over to me by Pastor G.I. Wilson. He was a real father figure. I was single in those days. I went as a single person, and he found a little flat for me, and he sort of fathered me and handed over the church to me. And well, it was supposed to be a renovated church, but the council wouldn't give permission to renovate. It wouldn't give him permission to build a new church, so he knocked it down to about a metre above the ground and renovated it. It was a beautiful little church, and look, everything was looking rosy in those days. I was just a young intern, and there's a lot of respect for the ministry in those days. It was just phenomenal.
In the community or within Adventism?
Within our church community.
Right.
There's a tremendous respect for ministry, and these days everybody's called a pastor, but in those days it was a little bit snobbish. I mean, you weren't called pastor until you were ordained, and if you're an intern, you were called brother. And in Cottesloe Church, the people there were all old enough to be my parents or grandparents. I was just a young bloke out of college, but they wanted to show me respect, and they'd always address me as either Brother Gazsik or Mr. Gazsik.
Right.
And I'm young enough to be their grandchild, and they showed this respect, but they'd always, just to keep me in my place, they'd always say, "Oh, Brother Gazsik, dear," or "Mr. Gazsik, dear." They're lovely people. But from there, I had, and I worked with Athol Tolhurst, Lyndon Schick. I was a lackey on a couple of mission teams.
Tell us a little bit about working with Athol. I've got Wes coming on next week for an interview. Actually, if Wes is watching, I don't think we've locked it in yet, but can you
okay.
look at next week?
Well, Wes was born.
He's agreed to coming on board.
Yeah, well, Wes was born while we were working. My wife and I were working with Athol,
Yeah.
and we got married. Just after Wes was born, and so Athol and Athol married us, and anyway, at the reception, Wes was just a little baby. So Karen, my wife, was in a bridal dress, and so, but she was very clucky. So she took a hold of Wes in her arms, with a picture of her with a brand new baby in her bridal attire. But look, Athol was a tremendous bloke to work with.
Yeah, that's what I just want you to dig into that a little bit, because did that help maybe save you a little bit later in the post-Glacier view?
It possibly could have. Athol was very caring of his mission team. He really was, and being an intern sort of thing, he was my supervising pastor, and he was really a tremendous bloke to work with. And I don't quite understand what happened later on. In his attitudes and so forth, but working with him, I learned a great deal. And he would never get you to do anything that he wouldn't do himself. So you never felt that he was giving you the dirty jobs to do. And he was always composed. And I remember one time the microphone packed up just before this was a big town hall meeting, we had 1,000 people or something.
Wow.
The microphone packed up, and he tracked it down to the cable. So here he is sitting in front of the stage, unscrewing the microphone connections and doing it back up again. And nothing seemed to distress him.
Yeah.
So we had a great time with him. But then I went. I got a call to Carmel College as preceptor and Bible teacher, and social director and church pastor and all those sorts of jobs. And that's when things started to come forward about the gospel and the investigative judgment, and in a sense I was a little protected being at Carmel, and the principal at that stage was Bob Bowers, and he was a tremendous bloke. He was very protective of his staff, and just a great bloke to work with. But the rumblings were starting about that at that time. And in 1979, I got a call to Victoria, in youth ministry in Victoria. So I missed out on those really difficult days in the early 80s. And I think the people like Gordon Hammond and Wayne Popke and a few of those fellows were there in Western Australia at the time.
They had troubles.
Yeah. And so unfortunately I got a call to Victoria. But I've got to say that what I couldn't understand was that some of these fellows were really vocal about what Des Ford was teaching. And they had a meeting. I went to a meeting at the WA University. They had, I don't think it was called a forum meeting, but it was kind of a meeting, to discuss all this. And my feeling was that while they might have been trying to promote what Des Ford was teaching, they really didn't understand a basic study on the 2,300 days. As strange as it might sound, they're trying to compare the two, but they really had no basic understanding of the 2,300 days or Daniel 8:14 or whatever. So I never quite got into it after that, because I got called out of the conference. But once I got to Victoria, as I say, it was a very, very safe conference. And I was in youth ministry, and I remember Glacier View had happened, and we used to live next to the Nunawading Church. And after Glacier View, they called a meeting of all the ministers in the conference, at which they were going to explain what happened at Glacier View. But we were about to run a youth camp up at Hauqua, and we were running, taking all our supplies up there and all that sort of thing. And so I said to the union president at the time, I was going to take the meeting. I said, look, I'm sorry, I just can't stay for the meetings. I've got to get the stuff up for the camp. I said, but tell me, just briefly, tell me about Glacier View. And he said, oh, well, we put it to Des. And
this is now after August 80.
Yeah, this is
how long after?
Oh, about maybe 12. Well, no, I'm not sure how long after. They'd all just come back from Glacier View, all the administrators and those who had been present at Glacier View.
So it would have been still end of 80 possibly then.
Yeah, in early 80s or something. Probably, yeah.
And sorry, go on. And he was there. He'd gone over there.
Apparently so, yeah.
Can you say his name, or is that...
No, I won't say his name.
Yeah, that's okay. I just wondered.
But anyway, he was the union president at the time. Some people work it out, but I caught him in front of Nunawading Church. I said, look, I said, Pastor, I can't come in, but I really would like to know what happened. And basically he said, oh, well, look, we said to Des, well, Des, if you haven't got 1844 investigative judgment, what do you have, as an Adventist? And the president said to me, well, he gave some feeble response about the health message and so forth. And I thought, oh, okay.
A feeble response.
Well, yeah.
In a 991-page document.
Yeah, they weren't his words, but that's what he was implying.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah.
And I thought, oh, okay. I was too busy to go and do a youth camp, so off I went. And then later on, as I said, when I met Des, and we were able to talk about it, I virtually asked him the same question, and he replied and he said, look, Adventism has got so much going for it. Apart from 1844 investigative judgment, there's and he laid out a dynamic, fantastic future for the church and its direction and its doctrines and its lifestyle. It was much more dynamic than what these other fellows were trying to pick up on.
Do.
Yeah.
Essentially, you questioned the 1844 investigative judgment doctrine from a biblical perspective before you even did the ministry.
Well, yes.
So in some ways, your whole ministry was able to provide pastoral care and support within Adventism, even though you may not have actually believed anything happened that night on October 22, 1844 anyway.
Look, I've got a tremendous respect for the Adventist organisation. All of my ministry, my wife and I have been just treated so well by administrators. They've been kind and caring. Maybe other than one or two occasions when I've had a bit of a kerfuffle with them, but they really have cared for us, so much so that when I came to retire, I said to Scott Hopkins up here, Scott, I said, it's a scary thing to retire from the Adventist ministry. He said, what do you mean? I said, you guys have got our life so covered and so helpful. Our kids get special fees for school. The days when we used to rent a house, you guys would take care of our rent, our car policy. I said, we're in a very safe and cocoon organisation. To go out on my own now and have to live life for real, it's a scary prospect.
To live life for real.
Yes. Not that I wasn't before, but
no.
Having to take care of my own car registration and insurance and all that sort of thing, and it was a bit of a scary prospect in those days.
Yeah.
Or, when I retired. So look, as an organisation, we have just. I just think we are really well set up. In fact, every time I joined a minister's fraternal somewhere, those other ministers are so envious of our system. Because we have a good system. But I admire our education work, our hospital work, and when we go overseas, I don't know whether you ever saw it, but in Christianity Today, they had a fellow did a bit of a thesis, a paper on tracking down the missionaries that went into Africa, during the imperial days when Belgium and Germany and England were all setting up their things in Africa there. And he did a bit of a study between those who were independent missionaries and went to different African countries, and those who were government-sponsored missionaries and went to the countries where, where they were trying to rape the natural resources and so forth. And what he found was that those countries that had independent missionaries today are doing much better than those countries that had government-sponsored missionaries, because the independent missionaries went in and they set up schools, they set up clinics, they taught the people. And so in those countries, there's less corruption, there's better services. And I think the beauty of Adventism is that we do much the same thing. We go in there with our education, with our hospitals, we benefit the people, we're there for the benefit of the people. And I think we do a fantastic job in that way. It's just a bit sad that I think that some of these countries, they've become very conservative Adventists.
Yeah, that's ironic, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think in some ways that's why I was listening to, I can't remember who, one of the recent interviews, and we were talking about Jan Paulsen getting booed.
Oh, yes.
And part of it was, I think he was pointing out the irony to a lot of the places where Adventists had been and had granted lots of leeway to people that were coming in from different cultures into the Adventist church. That yes, some could. I think there was even some situations where even polygamy was allowed until the cultural kind of climate just transitioned, and he was saying we're asking that leeway now with regards to women's ordination, and everyone booed.
Yes. Yeah, that was tragic.
Yeah.
Yes.
So when did you actually first hear of Glacier View? Like when you were saying about that conversation you had with was it union president or
union
conference?
president? Yeah, union president.
It sounded like you were a bit more cavalier about it. Also, by the way, what happened with Glacier View? But you'd been following it or building up to it in some way. Your interest in it. I mean, back then, people don't realise it wasn't like you could just jump online that night and find out what was going on. You had to wait.
Well, I listened to the tapes. I listened to the infamous tapes.
The October 27 PUC forum.
Yeah.
So tell me what your reaction was to that as a bit of an intro to the Glacier.
My reaction when I was that was of absolute delight.
Yeah.
I took at face value the fact that they said that theirs would be safe.
Yeah. Okay.
I took that at face value, and I thought, well, terrific. This could be a real turning point. And I was delighted at what I heard. Because you see, that very first year I did Daniel Revelation, Des Ford, he gave us as an assignment about 5 different questions of problems with Daniel, particularly in 1844. But I wasn't smart enough or in Adventism long enough to understand the full implication of those.
Yeah.
And we had to hand in our answers to those questions. But they were all the questions that came to the fore later on in 1979. And I think back now and I think, what a puny effort I made to try and sort that out. I didn't have a real understanding of what it was all about.
But I think you obviously, it resonated with you and you felt an alignment to it. We don't have to understand all the theoretical aspects of music to enjoy music. You can just tell when a chord resonates. You go, oh, that works for me.
Yes. Yes.
And I think a lot of people, when they heard the music of the PUC forum meeting, resonated and echoed around the world and has become known as the kind of this famous event. I was chatting just earlier to Larry Christoffel, and he was talking about the week before Cottrell had done a similar kind of righteousness by faith presentation at Andrews, and but he didn't seem to get the flack that Des did because he wasn't necessarily questioning the authority of Ellen G. White.
Yes.
He was, whereas Des was questioning, I guess, the very existence of 1844.
Yeah,
as
but
being,
look, my recollection
part of the Bible's prophetic claim.
Look, my recollection of Des's attitude towards Ellen White was that he had a great deal of respect and admiration for Ellen White.
Yeah, oh yeah.
He defended her. the best way he knew how and the most logical way he knew how. You
Yeah.
know, and I still quote this sometimes. You know, I remember him saying, "Brethren, you and I have access to the same writings that Ellen White had access to.
Mm.
But have any of us ever written a book like Desire of Ages or you know, or other books?" Now, I know there's some question as to who wrote them, you know,
Yeah.
but but
But even to compile stuff is
yes, but you
impressive.
know,
Yeah.
and so he said Ellen White was obviously inspired,
Yeah.
but not verbally. And she herself says that she's not verbally inspired, and she herself says that she's not infallible.
Yeah.
But she was an inspired woman who led the church.
Mm.
And yes, I agree. We've given her authority that she never claimed for herself.
Yeah.
You know, so but look. Often I've taken a sermon and just a year or two ago, I took a sermon. I was getting a bit more bold because I've retired now, and afterwards a fellow came out and shook my hand and said, "You should not have preached that sermon here in this church. You had no right to do that."
Wow.
You know? It was on the gospel, and
No right to preach the gospel here, brother.
yeah, but you know, it was more to do with judgment for the saints, not of the saints. If you summarize it that way.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, he started going off, and then he began to quote Ellen White, and I said, "Hold it right there." He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You and I have to stop this conversation right now." "Why?" I said, "You've appealed to the ultimate authority. How can I argue against the ultimate authority?
Mm.
We have to stop the conversation."
Yeah.
And he went off, and he thought I was rude. You know, he thought,
Yeah.
but that's the point.
Yeah.
I've said that to people, you know, shaking hands at the door afterwards. If they start quoting Ellen White, I say, "Look, I'm sorry, I just can't speak to you about it now."
If and you may have heard, I read the letter from in the last interview just near the end there from in February of 1980 from Neil Wilson to Pearson, the previous GC president.
Yeah.
And in that letter, it's quite clear that what was concerning them the most was that Des was potentially going to undermine the authority of Ellen G. White.
Yes.
It seems hard for the Adventist Church to let go of that. You know, like even in your baptismal certificate, you have to sign that you believe, you know, the ongoing interpretation. What if prophets are about their time, providing comfort for their time periods? Why do Adventists continue to place her in an elevated position?
Well, I can only reflect on how I became an Adventist. You know, I told you I was going through an existential type time and reading Paul Sartre and so forth.
Mm.
Then along came an Adventist pastor and said, "Listen, on the basis of the Bible and Ellen White, I could put a fence around your life. So as long as you stay within that, you know, like Ellen White says, you don't do this, you don't do that, whatever, and there's your life you know, in a nice nutshell, so to speak."
Mm.
And I've got to tell you that to hear those words and say, you know, and Ellen White saying these things, reading her books and so forth, it's a tremendous burden lifted off your shoulder, because you are safe within that, you know, as Paul Simon says, safe within the womb. You know, no one touches me and I touch no one, and you know, all those words.
Yeah.
And I've got to look for a year or so. It was a tremendous sense of relief.
Right.
But you know, as you get on a bit, you think, well, hang on a minute. Life isn't that clear. It isn't that black and white. And a lot of Adventists, I believe, come into the church because of that.
Right.
Those who never move on stay the ultra conservatives and don't want to budge. Those who realise that life is much more difficult than just that.
Mm.
Are the ones who are open to change and open to growth and so forth. And I think that, you know, that's the way it happened for me, and I think that's the way it happens for a lot of other Adventists too, is that they just feel terribly comforted by the Adventist message, just stay within that box.
Why do each side want to change each other? Why don't the more progressive Adventists just go, hey, no worries, you guys. If you feel comfortable and safe within that, go for it. and why don't the more conservatives ones say, hey, we feel really comfortable with this, and you guys want to explore the universe, off you go. We'll have Memorial Church and Avondale College Church. We'll just have two different churches. Like,
yes, but I think
why do both want to change each other so much?
Well, I think that part of it is because they don't want to let people out of their box. That's the first thing, and very often as people move out of their box, they become a threat to the people still in the box, so to speak. They're challenging their particular lifestyle.
Yeah.
You know, and that box is made up of lifestyles. You know, you don't smoke, you don't drink, you don't dance. And I resonated with that too, because when I became a Methodist, we used to have a Methodist hall in Benalla called the John Cooper Hall, and it was donated by the fellow on the basis that they would never ever hold a dance in that hall. You know, so when I became an Adventist, I thought, yeah, that'll do me. But you know, as somebody once said, Ellen White came out of Methodism and that sort of thing. But it's just such a comfort. But when people start to question what's in the box, it's a threat to those people who are still there.
Yeah. So you've listened to the. I hear what you're saying. I agree. Well said. So you've listened to the 79 forum tape. It's inspirational.
Yes.
You enjoy it. You think, yeah, as promised, Neil Wilson wasn't going to make this a judicial event. Glacier View was more to discuss. I've mentioned the letter where he obviously did have some political kind of thoughts coming into play. So Des prepares his, 991-page document. Everyone turns up at Glacier View. Did you have conversations with any fellow pastors besides the union president you spoke of that went there or that were commenting on it, that were also following it with interest like yourself? What kind of conversations were happening around it?
Look, my recollection is that most of the time the pastors were I'll use the word afraid to actually talk about it openly.
Okay.
There were kind of comments made, but nothing real deep and serious. It was just like, well, listen, yes, it's happened. Let's forget about it. Let's move on, and we'll all forget about it.
Right.
That's the impression I got, and I really think that, as my understanding of the history of the church is that that's the way it handles its crises. Is that okay? Yeah, it's happened. Let's not talk about it. Let's move on. We'll all forget about it. Yeah.
And some people have said they wish Des hadn't been so forthright. But when you think of Luther hammering his 95 theses or points of whatever, I can't remember, I've got a mental blank. Yeah. You know what I mean? He's nailing in his thesis at the cathedral door.
Yeah.
It's pretty forthright and respected by all Protestants. Why do you think people are too scared to go, good on you, Des, thanks for nailing that into the door of the Adventist church?
Oh, look, it might be a simplistic answer, but I really think that people were worried about their jobs.
Yeah.
They really were. I mean, and as I said to you before, if you've been an Adventist minister, right, when you come out of school virtually,
yeah,
what else do you go to? Your Avondale theology degree doesn't get you too far.
Why do you think, on the other side, the more conservatives, the Concerned Brethren, the Standish Brothers, they did not seem concerned with their jobs. They were just concerned about preaching their truth. Does someone's passion and willingness to give up a job validate what they're promoting?
No, it doesn't validate it, but it's pragmatic.
Yeah.
And even with the Standish, look, what I found is that I guess the gospel side of the church were not doing what the church was expected to do. You see, the conservatives are full bent on evangelism.
Yeah.
They're out there. They're in your face, if I put it that way. They're in your face. They're knocking on doors. They're doing it. They're putting their money up there. I think the church genuinely felt that if they lost them, that they would lose their financial backing, lose their workers. And so administration, I think, would naturally just migrate to supporting those sorts of people, and then they got the voice, Whereas to me, evangelism is not going out there knocking on doors. Evangelism is inviting people into the kingdom of God at every opportunity that you get. You know, it's becoming relevant within your community. It's not just putting up cafe churches or whatever, or doing ADRA work, but it's becoming relevant within your community. Every church, I believe, is an outpost of the kingdom of God, and people outside of that church need to be able to look into that church and see how attractive it is. But this in the present is what it will be like in the future when Jesus comes back again. You know, and I think that's what evangelism ought to be.
I think, and look, I think that's gold, what you've said there, that it's important to be relevant in the community. For me personally, I felt that when I was at that age, when I was kind of entering into going to Avondale and, you know, thinking about what I was going to do with my life and those kind of, and I'm not being a victim or complaining or anything. This is just an observation from even looking. I often look back at my life as an observation anyway, without great emotion. But there didn't seem to be a lot of making my life relevant. Now that's like, oh, what about me? I'm not meaning that. I just remember seeing a lot of effort for the church to be relevant in the community. Yes. A lot of pastors, a lot of young ministers leaving the church, and a lot of other people within the church fighting, and a lot of people not wanting to talk about stuff because they were scared of losing their jobs. For my generation, there became a good 10 years of not really providing anything for that generation. So a lot of my generation were literally off drinking, drugs. It was a wild kind of 10 years there, I think, for a lot of Adventist people from my generation, as in if you were entering Avondale College in 81, which is funny, that like 81 was my first year, almost oblivious to everything that was going on, but being very aware that my existence in there was not being catered to, if that makes any sense.
It does.
And again, I'm not playing a victim card at all, but the church can sometimes want to focus so much on the relevance of what they are being perceived as or what they are to community, and that is brilliant stuff. I think if you're not relevant to your community, what's the point? Yes. But we need to be relevant to our community as well, I think.
Yes. And well, you know, I mentioned before about the golden age of Avondale. Avondale was a very simple place in the 60s. It really was. I mean, you had all the rules and regulations, and most students abided by them, and you know, it was a great place to be. But looking back on it, to me, it was the world passed me by as I stayed in a cloistered existence. You know, the 60s with the flower power, the LSD, the psychedelic people, and you know, the Kent State riots, and you know, student massacres, and even Vietnam. You know, and all of that was passing me by. I was at Avondale looking at it, you know, from a safe place. You know, and when I think back on that now, I think, I missed out on a lot. I didn't engage with the world in that.
Here's an interesting comment that I'll just say quickly before I forget. Sorry to interrupt. But your generation was catered to within the church almost.
Yes.
You had very little relevance to the outside world. Yes. My generation was hugely secular. From 1983 on, most of my social activity was secular and outside the church. But was not nourished in the church.
No. Well, so going back to Avondale, being a dean of men at Avondale, I was there for 8 years. The thing that was very hard to deal with was this secular attitude. Remembering what it was like when I was there, and then trying to accommodate the students that were there, you know, in my time as dean. And it was the big challenge was always, you know, now why are these kids going out on a weekend and getting drunk and taking drugs and getting involved in sex parties and so forth, and that was a real challenge, because you couldn't just say you don't do it.
No.
In my time, you had to get a leave to leave the college campus. You had to fill out all the forms.
Yeah.
But these kids were just coming and going as they pleased. They had cars.
Yeah. I tell you what, this is interesting because I'm getting to piece together some of my own healing over this. I hadn't realized this before because I feel that the church lost its, what's the word for it? When you should be caring after your young ones and those that need nurturing.
Nurturing.
Well,
Yeah.
it's fiduciary care over money, but what is it when it's over people? There's a word.
I'm not sure.
There's a word that'll
Yeah.
come to me. But I don't think. I think they were focused so much on purging people, on getting the right theology, on fighting each other, that my generation of that early 80s, so let's say 81 to 86, got a lot of our connection with the secular world, but we weren't going wild.
Yes.
We were enjoying going to concerts, playing music. When I then went away to live in New Zealand in '86, and when I would come back every year and sing though and get involved a little bit. But I remember towards the end of the '80s, a way different kind of tone amongst the Avondale students. There was a kind of out of control, wild kind of party kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
And I remember that I think there was a famous beach party that people talked about, and even Raglan Marx, I think, refers to in one of his open letters of concern to Avondale College in 1987. I was just as disgusted by this.
Yes.
And I remember saying something at a gig I was doing at college because it had happened the night before, and I said something on the Saturday night at a gig of how disgusted I was.
Yes.
But so what my generation then tried to do in the 90s was offer a spiritual component to young people, but we didn't really add the theological component to it. So again, something was lost to Adventism, I think.
Yes.
And I guess
Yes.
part of my frustration and yearning and what I'm learning from this conversation is that the leadership of a flock must take responsibility in nurturing its young people and nurturing its members. And I just think that Adventism since Glacier View is failing at that. And I think churches are great. Like you can go to your local Gateway Church here or Charlestown, Wallsend. There's place Springwood in Queensland. There's all sorts of wonderful places where individual churches and people are doing great things. But church leadership is not standing up enough for the people that are its flock. And we're looking back now at 40 years of August 1980. Here we are, August 2020. And I'm just looking back at all those eras where wonderful things have happened, beautiful, relevant things have been given to community, hearts have been saved, joyous music has been played.
Yes.
There's been some really great times, but I'm not seeing leadership's hand in that.
No, that's true. But look, I spent 8 years or so in youth ministry, and I look back now and I think to myself, really, what did I accomplish in that time? Yeah, we had some good youth rallies and all that sort of thing. And it's really nice when, years later, a kid will come up to you, or an adult now come and say, "Oh, Pastor, remember when we went to that junior camp that you ran and you did this for me?" And, and that's really nice. But I've got to ask myself, well, look, what has that done to give you an understanding of reality?
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that we need to help people understand is that the Bible first and foremost is a valid description of reality. Way back in Genesis, where God creates the world, and we are image-bearing stewards in this reality that God calls earth. Heaven and earth were together at one time, and sin separated heaven and earth, and God's whole plan is to bring heaven and earth back together again. And that's the beauty of the Adventist message. And I remember John Paul Ian saying that the cosmic conflict. He also said that there are only about 11 theologians in Christian history, Western Christian history, who base their theology on this cosmic conflict concept. And I really think that we need to be showing our kids that this is a very valid and authentic description of reality. That God is trying to bring heaven and earth back together again. He's going to come back the second time, but then there's a whole new creation. The whole universe will be recreated.
Mm.
You know, and I think we don't, in a sense, make this whole biblical narrative serious enough for our kids.
Yeah, well, I think we've,
You know, it's all Bible stories, but how do we relate all those Bible stories to the total biblical narrative?
and if you've got leadership that's so concerned about pleasing one side or the other,
Yes.
purging its members, leaders and pastors too scared to say what they really think, then the only thing that's going to happen is nice youth programs and wonderful
Yes.
worship services and independently run programs by great parents.
Yes. Yes.
The leadership, culpable is the word. They are culpable
Yes.
for 40 years of not providing this kind of care, which I can't remember the word of,
Yes.
which is, I just think there needs to be some really, like I was really excited to be an Adventist during the time of, you know, your Jan Paulsons and people like
Oh, yes.
yourself and people that were just, you know, willing to engage and show care. Lyle Heiss, you mentioned before, he was literally a neighbour of mine in Cooranbong, a fantastic gentleman.
Yes.
John Den, you know, his
Yes.
wife, they just changed my life. You know, they're wonderful people. But it seems like all these wonderful people are constantly having to kind of, are we okay here? What's going on with the leaders?
Yes.
I mean, I don't mind calling them out, and I think it's time they actually started really doing something special to turn it around, because otherwise the church is in jeopardy, and Glacier View 2 is about to happen, you know.
Well, I very often, as you're speaking now, I remember what Des used to say. Heard him a couple of times say, he said, you know, the church is marching, ever marching backwards. and it really, in some sense, that's true, you know. Yeah.
And in spite of all the creative energy and wonderful people that are striving to push it forward.
Yes.
You know, you speak of your first years at Avondale with the great lecturers.
Yes.
You know, we've had our Norm Youngs and our Lyndon Rogers and our Des Fords, and I could literally, all the people I've interviewed, incredible people.
Yes.
But constantly kind of getting to a wall where they just, you know.
Well, the other one was Dr. Magnuson, Eric Magnuson.
See, another neighbour of mine, literally on the other side.
Brilliant man. He took us through our introduction to science classes, you know.
Yeah.
And he also sort of talked about the philosophy of science and so forth. And I really enjoyed his classes. But those people allowed us to have open minds.
Yeah.
Even though we knew that there was an administration background that's forcing us into this particular mould, these guys at Avondale were challenging us to open our minds and to see things, you know, in a slightly different way. And I just enjoyed that so much.
Yeah. I released an album in the early 90s based on my experiences of the 80s called Four Walls, No Ceiling. And it just hit me that how terrible that I'm having to write a song that I feel that I've got walls all around. I make an album, walls all around me, confining me, but at least I've got a free mind. Imagine the power of the church if you could go no walls, no ceiling. You know, God is in this place. That as a young boy, I'm having to write music that's kind of about being repressed, but I'm going to still find freedom.
Yes.
Totally unsupported by top-level leadership.
Well, in the early days, I've often thought, now, what was I like in the early days? And a phrase comes to mind, which a reviewer, spoke about James Joyce, the Irish novelist.
Yes, I love James Joyce.
And he said James Joyce was an adolescent romantic obsessed with his own glorification. And I think a lot of us still remain adolescent romantics obsessed with their own glorification.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, interesting. So you've gone through the Glacier View. You would have been a bit surprised then that Des was fired, because you thought he's just sharing his views.
Yes. Look, I was pretty. In many ways, I was devastated personally and emotionally. I was kind of devastated by it. But you know, he encouraged us to hang in there, to stay there, and you know, be there for the long haul. And I'm glad I did. I think I still have people who come and say, "Oh, Pastor, I remember that sermon you preached about the gospel," or whatever, and I think, yep, it was valuable to stay in the church and be able to preach the gospel. And I really can't understand why I never got in trouble. I really can't.
That was my next question, because as one of the things I'm looking forward to talking with Wes about, and Gillian just remind me, it is definitely confirmed. It's next Friday, 11 a.m. if anyone wants to join in. Not tomorrow, the next week. Wes Tolhurst will be in the house, and we'll chat with him about his dad. And I don't want to be creating kind of scenarios where, like, that's what I was saying before, I don't see myself as a victim at all.
No.
I'm getting a bit cross at what I think is there's a system in place which is just failing its members, but I'm not wanting to attack people on that or certain names or anything like that. That's why I respect you not mentioning names. It's fine. And when I've had some very interesting chats with Bob Wolfgram and Rick Foray and Harry Ballas, the sociologists amongst us, they've really helped me understand this is how systems kind of predictably play out,
Yes.
So without kind of being mean to specific players, what kind of pressure is put on leaders of an institution that were put on, the people like Parmender and Athol, that suddenly make them just go extra hard at kind of purging and we probably need to chat to our sociologists to understand a little bit more of why that happens.
Yes.
But from your experience, did you notice a ramping up of angst towards pastors who supported Des in that time period? Now we're talking like post Glacier View up to about 84.
Yes. A lot of my friends, received the wrath of a lot of the presidents and administrators during that time. Many of them didn't survive in the ministry; they left. I remember going to a new conference, and the conference president saying to me, "Well, Alec, tell us what your ambitions are in ministry." And I was saying, "Look, just to survive."
Just to survive.
Yes. And I was, I had tongue in cheek, but during that time, a lot of my friends did leave the ministry, and it was a very difficult time. And attitudes changed. I still can't understand why, but a lot of attitudes changed during that time. People were very wary of each other and so forth. But I'd heard all the stories about Des and George Burnside, and like when I was a student at Avondale College, George Burnside was the evangelist, and he'd come to take a few talks for us, like in the subject homiletics and evangelism. And honestly, when he walked down the Watson Hall corridors, it was like the boys were worshipping him.
Right.
I understand that, but he was, as plain as a nose on your face, he'd say.
He had an air of charisma about him.
Oh yeah. But my not regret, but I do have a respect for the concerned brethren, because I was on an executive committee once where a couple of them came to talk to us, and the thing is that I fully understand that they truly believe that Seventh-day Adventism is not indebted to any previous historical Christian movement, not even the Reformation, because we have a unique understanding of salvation. You see, so we shouldn't, as Seventh-day Adventists, and we have been, saying that we are the inheritors of the Reformation gospel, because they don't believe that we are the inheritors of the Reformation gospel. They truly believe that we have a unique understanding of the gospel that no other church has. And if they want to contend that, that's fine. But I don't believe that. I believe that the gospel is everlasting. It's Pauline and what Jesus said. And so we really are, in a sense, the inheritors of the Reformation gospel. Even though Luther made mistakes, we are the inheritors of the Reformation gospel. But the concerned brethren say, no, we have a unique understanding, and nobody else in Christendom has that same understanding that we do.
And they've got grounds for that claim, and I think that's why you can have sympathy for them and empathise with their cause and their movement, because the founders of the Adventist Church make that claim, and there's plenty of information there to support that. Ellen White's thought that too, and so I often feel like if it wasn't for Questions on Doctrine, which kind of created a new fertile soil for the more progressive Adventist, I used to say, well, just give the church back to these guys. It's their birthright. But now I can kind of see if you came into the church post-QOD, or you responded to the teachings of the church as presented in QOD, you'd go, oh, this is my church. And so we've got two churches laying claim to their birthright, but one is more of a modern progressive one, and one is actually, I think, core Adventism. So I agree with you. I have a lot of sympathy for my conservative brothers and sisters and concerned brethren. And
well, there's a book that very rarely gets mentioned. Questions on Doctrines. We speak that all the time. But one of the books that Des introduced us to, I think it was in one of the philosophy courses that he was teaching us. But it was a book called Answers to Objections by F.D. Nichols.
Yes.
Now,
I've got that in my bookcase just over here.
Yes. Now, in the appendices at the back, it has one on the failure of this, what do they call it, the human progress, and he makes it very clear there that, and as Des often pointed out too, that while Adventism may not have a prophetic place, in the scheme of things, it does have a providential place.
Yeah.
And F.D. Nichols was saying that, about 1844 and that there was all of those, Darwinism, evolution was coming to the fore, and Karl Marx was, coming to the fore. And he said Adventism was raised up as a bulwark against all those isms that were, developing. Nihilism with Kierkegaard and not Kierkegaard, I've even forgotten now. But anyway, Nietzsche, with nihilism with Nietzsche and so forth, which led into the Second World War and all that sort of thing. And Des, got us to read that appendices and to show us that Adventism was providential in standing against these isms that were developing, that would come to the fore in the 20th century. And to me, that was exciting. That was, I had a purpose.
I'm glad you mentioned that book, because it's Answers to Objections, isn't it?
Yes.
And I used to often get Questions on Doctrine and that one confused. And I'd be having conversations where I was talking about and using that title, but I meant Questions on Doctrine.
Yes.
Sometimes I meant the F.D. Nichols book, and I was me. So I'm glad, because that's worth another close look at, I reckon. Well,
the appendices in the back are probably better than the actual answers to the objections. The appendices in the back are fantastic.
Oh, some of the books are often like that. I remember the church's response to Walter Ray's book, The White Lie. Their response was The White Truth, and I found that raised more questions that worried me than the actual White Lie book did.
Yes.
So you didn't really feel the purge then?
No, I guess I was in situations where, I wasn't really under any threat. I mean, in youth ministry, and then at Avondale, I felt pretty safe at Avondale.
Yeah.
And then from there, I had the best 4 years of my ministry life up in Darwin. I spent 4 years out there. I was actually sent up there, I'll be quite truthful and open. I'd run my course at Avondale, and they wanted to get rid of me, so I had to look around for a job, and there was no jobs. Nobody was. Our system.
Yeah. I'm not laughing at you, and I'm not laughing at the people that sent you. I'm laughing at the system that just does that.
Yes.
Yep, right. You've had your time now. God's moving you over here.
That's right. And I've been such a bad boy that nobody was going to employ me within the conference. And I thought, okay, this is it. I'm about to lose my ministry. And next thing, fortunately, this once again, it was Avondale networking and old friends, David Blanche. No, actually, it was two of them. What's his name? Townend was president over in New Zealand, and he offered me a job in New Zealand. And I was just about to take it, and then David Blanche offered me a job in Darwin. And I thought, well, I can always drive back from Darwin, but I can't drive back from New Zealand. So I took the Darwin position. And honestly, it was the best thing I ever did.
Wow.
The Darwin people were just so open and accepting. Doctrine wasn't a real issue, you know. You visit people there and you turn up in a T-shirt and a pair of shorts and some thongs. You kick your thongs off the front door and you go in and visit, you know. And those 4 years were absolutely,
Really?
I think they revived me, you know. They gave me a new vision of ministry. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. So maybe you were purged without realizing it.
Oh, it probably was.
How many committees
No,
have your name came up in, but was just quietly moved off?
yes, well, I think I was basically purged from Avondale because of my handling of those sex parties and things, I think.
Well, I don't think this is my point about that. I certainly don't think that you know, and other staff that were there were in any way responsible for that, because those very leaders that were suddenly moving you on had
Yes.
created that exact situation by
Yes.
ignoring my generation,
Yes.
and the one just below me. Of course, if you're a shepherd of a flock, and you go wandering off into the bush and
Yeah.
leave the gate open, the wolves are going to get in.
Yes.
And you did an admirable job trying to contain a situation that was caused by them in the very first place.
Well, you know, you do feel for the parents who send their kids to Avondale and thinking it's going to be a safe environment. You know, and my philosophy was basically, well, look, your job coming to Avondale is to have fun. My job is to stop you.
Yeah.
And as long as it's only fun, I mean, you know, cricket in the corridors or water fights or whatever, that's fun.
Yeah.
But when it got to what I thought was very malicious and almost evil stuff that was happening,
Yeah.
and it was involving other people, I mean, we had a couple of kids there were as bright as bright. They never used to have to study and they get through their studies, but they were leading other kids on who needed to study, and they, you know, they were failing their subjects and wasting their parents' money.
Yeah.
And, you know, my whole point was, well, these are the kids we've got to do something about.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But then as a dean of men, you become the scapegoat. You know, you're not keeping my kids safe at school.
Hardest job ever.
And then of course the administration hierarchy, you have to blame somebody, so you get the blame. You know.
Here's the irony. You've got this great environment when you're at Avondale in the 60s because of people that are liberal, progressive, open. You can have an open mind, you can share. It was very safe. There was a lot of freedom spiritually, theologically to discuss things. Yeah, there was conservative things going on. But the irony is that the people that rose up wanting to get rid of the Des Fords and create an environment, one, they got rid of that liberal mindset. The church leaders then became so worried about, you know, how people saw them, and they would fire people, and people were so scared that my generation suddenly went into an Avondale that was kind of like devoid of anything happening, and then the ones under me started getting wild and going really crazy. And then the late 80s, you get the conservatives saying, see what liberal Adventism does. But the irony is that if they'd left liberal Adventism alone, Avondale would have kept on with a beautiful progression of what was happening in the 60s and 70s.
That's right.
So they caused it. They put the fear up into the bellies of the leaders.
Yes.
The leaders purged, and then Avondale became exactly what they were trying to. You know, they were hoping it would never become. They caused it.
Yes. Well, my mantra usually in committees was, discipline committees and so forth, was usually, well, listen. If you guys have that rule in the rule book, I've got to enforce it. If you guys don't want to enforce it, take it out of the rule book.
Yeah.
But they're always too scared to take it out of the rule book because people outside of college, like the conservatives,
I know,
were seeing that those things were taken out and it's become
yes,
too
that's
liberal.
the irony that they caused it, and then they were able to go see.
Yes.
Oh, that's so sad. That's just hit me. And then in the 90s, a lot of us came along and we started focusing just on Jesus and worship.
Yes.
And there was a beautiful tone that sort of started coming back again in through the 90s, which I think is there still to this day, you know.
Yes.
I've been playing the barn nights, not anymore because of the Conservatives yet again,
Yes.
for 30 years, you know, and the kids are fantastic. Like that, in those 30 years, we just let our hair down, lots of fun, great times, ending often with beautiful worships. I think that period that you were in there was certainly not anything to do with you. It was caused by this word that will come to me, where
Yes.
they didn't care for their young people, and the conservatives gloated over the kind of
Yes.
Avondale that had become that way. The leaders wanted to wash their hands of it
Yes.
and wouldn't adjust things, and the liberals had all left that were.
Yes.
So you weren't purged, but you were hung out to dry.
Oh, well, I know at the time I was having a few problems, like, difficulties with administration and so forth. And I got called into the conference office in Newcastle, and there was two presidents there, and they wanted me to talk about the teachings of Avondale. They're trying to get rid of lecturers who, weren't actually preaching the truth or teaching the truth.
Yeah.
And I I refused to enter in a conversation about that. I said, look, the real issue is not the lecturers. The real issue is the administration and the way in which they're responding to the students and their behaviour. But they wouldn't hear about that. They just wanted to talk about the lecturers and the truth that they weren't teaching. Yeah.
Well, that just confirms what I've just said,
Yeah.
which one day I'll formulate into a very concise little paragraph instead of a 10-minute ramble,
Yes.
because it's only hitting me now.
Yes.
That's what I love about these conversations. We're just being authentic and open and honest, and the discussion can lead to finding new light and new understanding of where we've come from, and hopefully avoid things in the future.
Yes.
And the North New South Wales Conference has had 30 years of some really beautiful times, and now there's some more conservative leadership coming into play, and you're not allowed to sell coffee there at the campground, and standards are falling, they're saying. But what's going to happen is that they're going to cause that same thing again, where
Yes.
they'll get rid of the people that are, providing a bit more of a liberal open-mindedness to theology and music. They'll get rid of those people. People then will be too scared to speak up. Young kids will be feeling abandoned, and 10 years' time there'll be the same kind of problems that were happening in the late 80s at Avondale, because and then they'll go, see, told you that was going to happen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they've caused it again.
Yes. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Oh, it is so frustrating. Oh, dear.
Yes.
I promised myself every interview I'm not going to get frustrated anymore.
Uh,
But again, I highlight, I'm not frustrated with you.
no.
I'm not frustrated with the memory of these things. I'm frustrated with the fact that it just seems to be looping
Yes.
around.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts on, righteousness by faith? What appeals to you about that simple gospel message? And then do you think it's thriving in the denomination now? And we've kind of touched on that a little bit already.
Well, my own thoughts is, look, as I said, I'm a bear with a very small brain, and the gospel to me is quite simple. And while I understand that Paul is talking about defining the gospel I just hang my hope on the gospels in terms of, say, John 3:16. God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. And then, of course, there is the whole notion of repentance and baptism. And I've come to believe that baptism is the doorway into the present kingdom. I think every denomination, what they emphasize is true, but they get a bit tangled up in the details. And I think Adventism is the same. Its emphasis on second coming of Christ, the new creation, Sabbath, they're all true, but we get a bit messed up in some of the details. Baptists, yeah, they're right in their baptismal doctrine. But even the Jehovah's Witnesses are correct in their emphasis of the kingdom of God. And I think that currently my feeling of the gospel is that the gospel is the doorway into the present kingdom, not somewhere in the future, but we can experience now what God promises us for the future by repentance. And repentance is not feeling sorry for the naughty things I've done. Repentance is taking on the mind of Christ and seeing reality the way God intended it. Where we are creature, this is Des Ford's phrase, we are creature ever dependent upon the Creator. And that's why we need to look at reality. And so the gospel to me simply is that Jesus has believed in me. I say yes, I repent. Belief is wholehearted. Then there's a baptism, which is the doorway into the kingdom, into the outpost of God's kingdom at the present in that church, which is functioning as it should, as an outpost of the kingdom of God. And I often sort of smile to myself and think, some of the weird books we have these days, like Harry Potter, and even the Narnia stories. It's amazing how that those Narnia children entered into Narnia through the wardrobe, into this real reality, which is just as real as the world they came from. They entered through the wardrobe. And Harry Potter, to get on the train that goes to Hogwarts, they've got to charge at this doorway, in the station,
it's
and
like
they just go through it into the next reality. And to me, the gospel is that simple, that, look, I can have now what God has promised me in the future by believing in Jesus Christ. So that's my attitude towards the gospel at the moment. I don't like to get caught up in all of the soteriology and all that sort of stuff, It's just simple. Believe in Jesus, repent, enter the kingdom of God.
Yeah, and if you can't make it practical,
yes,
and if you can't make it simple, then it kind of detracts from the whole point of it.
Yes.
Can you just tell us a little bit of your thoughts on the compliance document?
I don't have too many thoughts on that because I'm retired. But my feeling is that, look, it affects the administrators, but it doesn't. Yeah, and I think it's wrong, if you want to put it that way. I think that you really can't. You can't control a group of volunteers through compliance demands. I really don't think so. But the thing is that most of those things our local church people have not even heard about. I teach speak up in Sabbath school classes now, and people haven't heard about the compliance documents. It's not filtering down to the ordinary church member at the low level of church membership.
And like you're kind of inferring or saying before, it's that's where the teachings of Christ are the most relevant.
Yes.
At where we all meet our everyday life.
Yes.
How is it relevant at that?
Yes.
So I guess they would see a lot of that stuff as something, like you say, they don't hear of it, or it's not going to affect them. And in many ways, it may never affect them no matter what happens, because if good people like yourself are reminding people of that simple nature of the gospel, yes, you can actually partake in those kind of understandings and practicalities without, and again, the storm can be raging all around you, but you can still find shelter from the storm. Good Bob Dylan song there. We were talking about Paul Simon before. You can still find shelter from the storm,
yes, in
spite of all the turbulence. And and even our conversation today, I've said some of my heated, passionate thoughts, and
yes,
we both shared ideas and stuff that might have got you fired 10 years or 20 years ago or something. I still get a strong feeling, and I think from you, and I think you do from me as well, that it's possible to find this beautiful calm and shelter no matter the crazy that's going around.
Yes.
I certainly don't live my life out in the crazy, and I talk a little bit about it in the interviews and things, but my actual day-to-day life is one that's filled with joy and practicalities of life, and
Yes.
a lot of the small things, and trying to apply the teachings of Christ into everyday life.
Yes. Peter, there's one thing that probably in all of our ministry I've tried to combat and fight hard against, and that's the notion of perfectionism. And you know, one thing we can be thankful for as a denomination, or a majority of people there, is Des's influence in preaching the gospel to combat perfectionism. It's a most insidious thing. Early in my ministry, in youth ministry, I was called to a family's place, and their son had committed suicide. And he left a note, and basically the note said that he was never going to make it. So why even try? And he, put a pipe in, exhaust pipe into his car, and he went to sleep. And ever since then, but the sad part is that the very people in his church who are preaching perfectionism were the least perfect people there. The two marriages had broken up. The people who were teaching it, the two marriages had broken up. They'd swapped partners, and they still claim to be Christians in regular standing. And Des, I think, did the church a service by emphasising the gospel and the freedom in the gospel. And my feeling is, I listened to part of Brinsmead's interview, and I couldn't quite follow the timelines, but I've always felt that when Des was younger, the division presidents and so forth have asked Des to combat Robert Brinsmead, Robert Brinsmead's perfectionism. And I'm sure that Des only found the only way to combat perfectionism is through the gospel.
Yeah.
And so he went out on a limb, preaching and promoting the gospel to try and overcome perfectionism.
Yeah.
And of course, the presidents who were there in his time were very appreciative. And other presidents who came behind him saw him out on the limb there, and they cut the limb off. The very thing that they wanted him to do, and he did.
Yeah.
They then cut the limb off behind him,
and did very effectively.
They did, yes, not very honourably, but effectively.
Yeah. In spite of what he was doing very effectively.
Yes. And I think that's what they asked him to do, I'm sure it was. So, I allow people to have their thoughts on many different things, but I will not tolerate perfectionism.
Yeah.
It's just too insidious and dangerous.
And I think, like you said, the freedom, the good news of the gospel, coupled with the assurance of salvation, is in essence what Des stood for.
Yes.
I've
never seen, in all of my time at Avondale, I never saw Des lose his temper or anything with us students, and we'd ask for it lots of times. The only time I saw him get a little bit irritated was when one of the students, we were supposed to do tutorials, and I think about the fifth time he asked for an extension. and Des had a few strong words with him over that one, but he was such a gentleman in all the lectures, and we would rush to the lectures. Honestly, we did. When Des Paul was lecturing, you'd be there early and be ready to go.
Wow.
He was a really charismatic figure around Avondale in those days.
Have you got any parting words of advice you'd like to give to the denomination as people watch this 100 years from now?
Well,
what will the church look like?
Yeah, look, I don't know what the church will look like 100 years from now. I hope we won't be here 100 years from now. But look, the only thing that after 44 years of ministry, and as I said, I have tremendous respect for the administration. We've been treated very well most times. But the only thing I wish for the church is that administrators were men of integrity. We had
about being shepherds.
Yeah, we had even being honest in many ways. We have a CFO here who I admire very much, because every time we have these conference regional meetings, and the conference officers give their report. Now he's the money man. He gives the money reports.
Yeah.
And probably his report is the most spiritual of the lot. You know, it's amazing. He puts in the tremendous spiritual context compared to the other guys from departments and so forth.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the way our church ought to be. It should be tremendously spiritual, tremendously honest. You know, and you pointed out too that usually if there's a problem, they just move you on.
Yeah.
So dealing with a problem, they just move it on. Somebody else's problem.
Or even just, there's more ways to suppress people and oppress people than what you visually can even see. Like, in Harry Ballas's thesis and his interviews, and he has suggested about 180 young pastors were purged. You think about the families, the kids, the people that are affected by just that, but not only that, the people that were just, sent off to the tiny little corners of Australia and New Zealand and America, or overlooked, their whole careers, or, gotten out with other little sneaky loopholes.
Yes.
It's just not on. And look, if what I'm saying and calling out the leaders, and there's leaders watching, come and be interviewed. I would love for union leaders, SPD leaders, conference leaders in Australia and New Zealand, come and chat with me. I'm not a terrible, ferocious person. I'm just defend the actions and tell me I'm wrong and not fine. I might go, oh yeah, okay, I see it from your point of view now. I want you just to share just in a kind of a nutshell what, and you have covered this already, but just something that is a passion of yours when you step up to the pulpit and you want the audience to take away, the congregation to take away something you've said that day. What things do you like to kind of say to your congregation when you preach? What are the things in a nutshell that you just want them to take away on that day?
Yeah, look, basically, I really enjoy the book of Colossians, the first two chapters, and the chapter 1 there, where Paul really says that this whole thing that we're involved in is bigger than we really understand. It's the recreation of the universe. It's heaven and earth coming together, and we can have that experience now through our belief and trust in Jesus Christ. And reality is not just what we see here. And I like the notion that there are some places where they're very thin. In other words, what they're saying is like Iona and so forth. They're in England, this very strange, mystical place.
Yeah.
It's a place where the separation is so thin that heaven and earth touch each other at times. And I just want people to experience that. That we live in look, life is hard. I mean, Des used to say this all the time. Life is not easy. Life is difficult.
Yeah.
But there are those moments when heaven and earth touch each other and sense the presence of God. And I just want people to live in those moments and to understand the reality of those moments.
I love that.
Well, I kind of think of the two different poets. There's Dylan Thomas, who said to his father's saying, rage against the fading of the light. Do not go gently into that good night,
Yeah.
And then I think of Robert Browning, who simply says, the best is yet to be.
Yeah.
And I believe that, if we believe in Jesus, the best is yet to be.
Yeah. And I love how you can balance both of those poetic concepts and notions in life, as long as you're seeking those beautiful moments where heaven and earth just seem to blend. Those little tiny moments, they're beautiful moments.
Yes.
Oh, Alec, it's been so good chatting with you today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
And you, Peter. As I say, I'm nothing to contribute theologically, but they're my memories and recollections.
Oh, look, I think it was great, and sorry if I've talked too much.
No, that's all right.
A good interviewer is supposed to not really say anything at all.
No, this is a conversation.
Conversation, yeah. I make no claims. Hey, if people want to join us tomorrow, we've got Doug Hackelman. He's a retired administrator, and I think from the Loma Linda Dental School, and former editor of Adventist Currents. So he'll be on 11 a.m. tomorrow.
Yes.
next week. I think Andrew Skeggs is going to be on one of the days. He wrote a big hello to you a while back.
Yeah, he was one of my number one students in the dormitory when I was there.
Great guy.
He took
And
me to see, I think it was him that took me to see Paul Simon down in Sydney.
someone mentioned Paul Simon, might have been him. And
Yeah.
Darren, my neighbour Darren mentioned my fishing buddy. So you must
Oh,
have.
yes, yes. I did do a terrible thing. I taught a lot of my students to fish.
Well, I think that generation, Darren, Andrew, those guys were coming along at the end of the 80s and
Yes.
really helped to usher in this beautiful era of the 90s and the 2000s and what's even going on now.
Yes.
There's a beautiful sense of spiritual connection with a lot of the young people in the Adventist church, and it's good to see. And those guys kind of were influenced by you and took the torch and went to
Well, I
carry
got
on.
to I've got to tell you one of the cute things that happened there. I was in my office one day in Watson Hall, and some of the theology boys came over and had a bit of a go at me. They had folders, their note folders, and they came over and opened up their note folders. Inside the first page was a big blown up picture of Des Ford. So I congratulated them, encouraged them. Yeah.
I remember Andrew was involved with the Jacaranda, and I remember finding the early 90s, it felt like a little bit what the late 60s, early 70s must have been. There was not only an interest in the arts and music, but there was a desire to have conversation again about theology.
Oh, yes.
And that was, I remember having, I'm looking forward to chatting with Andrew because I think
Yes.
he's a great guy. And so that's next week. We've got Doug tomorrow. And next Friday, we've got Wes at 11 a.m. But on Sunday night, I think, or earlier, I'll get a poster done up, or Lance will do a poster for us. And yes, I think that's all I've got to contribute. Any other announcements I can think of? No, but thank you, Alec.
And I think we'll leave it there. Those that are listening to the podcast, we've returned from 2020 back to 2026, if you're just listening to the audio. And that was my season 2, episode 41, Des Ford Glacier View retrospective season that we are now putting onto YouTube and other platforms live to the general public for the first time. And that was Pastor Alec Gazsik, who sadly has passed away since doing that interview. And what a great guy. A lot of the progressive Adventists and gospel Adventists that decide to stay and preach the gospel, good on them. No criticism. But I would add that the Adventist Church itself, in its official statement of beliefs, doesn't actually support the gospel that's represented in the Bible, the biblical version. So those who are staying and presenting the true gospel, just be aware that you might hit some walls and face some challenges, because at the core of Adventism is the belief that whether it's on your own merit, legalism, or whether it is with the infilling of the Holy Spirit that brings you into a place where you're able to live sin-free enough to vindicate God, it's all still requiring the handiwork of humans. And the point of the gospel as taught by the Bible and the cross is that was an atonement once and for all, and it ushered in a new covenant where rules still apply. Faye Simpson, please, I hope you're watching. The progressive Adventists, gospel Adventists, formers, those who preach the gospel, do not believe that one then can go willy-nilly, time to sin, woohoo, once saved, always saved. That's not what they teach. The rules are important, but the new covenant now focuses on salvation not by the merit of your ability to be sinless or keep the commandments. Those things are good for creating a better life here on earth, but they aren't salvific. So just to go out, we're going to play a short, 2 little clips, very brief, that encapsulate the secret that was revealed at the center of Glacier View, the lie that was presented post Glacier View that those present did not agree or find merit in Des Ford's teachings. The reality is they did reach consensus. So I'm just going to play out 2 brief clips of my interview with Bill Johnson, who was there and was the prime mover and shaker, and ironically helped perpetuate that lie, that myth.
Desmond Ford's teachings were tested against the scripture, and the Glacier View group testing them against the scriptures did not see light in his view. It is out of that context, not against Ellen White. Friday morning, the consensus statement that we developed was brought to the floor. It was read, it was discussed, and it was voted. If not unanimously, very close. And very interestingly, Desmond Ford said, I can agree with everything in this statement. Here's where things went off the rails, I believe. So we're getting just an hour or 2 and the conference is going to end, and I'm feeling incredible relief. Because it's been a week of high tension, high drama. And then suddenly another statement appears. I had no knowledge of it beforehand. It was a statement that had been prepared by a committee of 6 the day or the night before. And it had 10 points where Des Ford, his ideas disagreed with church teaching. And it was never discussed, it was never voted, it was simply read and taken away.
And that's the element of the title, the Kangaroo Court. It was predetermined that Des had to go. And I know Gillian speaks of that meeting, the 10-point statement was wheeled out, and she came away thinking, yeah, he's gone, he's been dismissed. And she got into some hot water for simply saying that to someone as she left that room. Whereas the reality, and she's very discerning, the writing was on the wall. So what that they didn't officially dot the I's and cross the T's? That was the moment that the dismissal was put into motion. She nailed that. And what I had thought could potentially be a reformation within the Adventist Church has been 46 years of a lot of weak, progressive gospel Adventist leadership. I'm going to be doing a program on that topic soon. I don't think that from 1980 to 2020 that I would hold these guys and women accountable for not doing more. I don't think during that time I would in any way criticize them. However, in the last 6 years, as they are all getting older, passing away, reaching retirement. In my humble opinion, I think they need to get organised, networked, monetized, and create a global progressive gospel movement that isn't based on Des Ford's teachings, but acknowledges the concept of putting the Bible first and enjoying the Sabbath, but not as a salvific. And as Frank Merendino says, being willing to jettison some of the pillars of Adventism, such as the scapegoat that I mentioned yesterday. Thank you, everybody, for joining me. Tomorrow we have Good News Fellowship, same time as we started today, which is 6:30 p.m. California time and 11:30 a.m. New South Wales, Australia time. And our special guest presenter tomorrow is Andrew Ormiston, who is a wonderful philosophical, intellectual kind of a guy who is very thoughtful and considered. And I know you will enjoy our gathering tomorrow. So come and join us for Good News Fellowship over at our YouTube channel there, which is simply type in at Gospel Good News Fellowship and you will find us. Thanks again, and thanks also for your support. I really appreciate that. I have just begun a totally new and exciting endeavor where this platform that I'm on right now, Restream, which helps to send out what we're doing to Twitch, Twitter, X, 2 YouTube channels, 1 or 2 Facebook groups, Discord, Rumble. In one moment, it just sends it all out there. But they've just offered to also automatically select 5 or 6 shorts, the little 30-second clips. And the only problem is it's $20 US a month. So if someone's interested in partnering with me, just down below here, where am I? Which hand am I moving? There we go. $20 a month would just really help because it's a bit of USA means, I think that's nearly $30 Australian. But it's a fantastic way to promote the channel. As I mentioned at the start of the program, we had so much engagement with yesterday's program, and part of that was to do with this new way of promoting and presenting the material via shorts, YouTube shorts. And as I said, I think there's upward of 6,000 between the platforms that I've mentioned and the shorts as well. So 6,000 people overnight got to hear more about SDAQ&A and our content. So I think the $20 a month is going to be a good investment. And if you'd like to help me with that, there's my details. If you'd like to just make a donation there at paypal.me/Peter Dixon Music. Well, until next week, I will, or tomorrow at Good News Fellowship, it's time for me to say farewell for today and look forward to seeing you again soon.